So an interesting conversation happened on episode 234 of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru involving Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, and CM Punk. And I think this is a conversation that needs to be had among wrestling fans. Is the AEW versus WWE war really just a debate over Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels' influence in today's pro wrestling? We talk about it today on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me is Ralph Valenti. Ralph, it's funny that these two names get brought up. A lot of fans that watch wrestling in the 90s probably were either a Bret Hart fan or a Shawn Michaels fan.
Yeah.
In our household, you were the Bret fan.
What? Yep.
I was the Shawn fan. You know, I remember watching WrestleMania 12. You were rooting for Bret. I was rooting for Shawn. And I think wrestlers today, I think you see the philosophy of Bret and you see the philosophy of Shawn. So do you really think that the war, per se, of AEW versus WWE is really a debate of philosophy between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart?
I don't necessarily think the war or the difference between the two can be point to just, you know, hey, this is the approach Bret Hart wanted to take for pro wrestling, the more serious approach, or Shawn Michaels, maybe a different approach. I think that it just comes down to, like you pointed out, what certain people grew up on and a certain mindset of what you think is important or should be valued in pro wrestling from the wrestler standpoint. If you look at Bret, obviously from everything that is reported and that you've read about, it's a much more serious approach. The technical side of things, the way that he worked, the backstage stuff, the fact about, if you've ever listened to any of his interviews, about the sense of pride that he took in putting some people over. I just listened to an interview a couple of days ago where he talked about wanting to put Shawn over and really wanting to invest time and putting Shawn over because he thought he was really good. Those two guys right before the Attitude Era were really the workhorses in WWE. Now, did they really get the recognition that they deserved? Probably not at that time, but I think as time has gone on and the fact that, you know, Shawn Michaels was able to make a comeback, have some great matches at WrestleMania, Bret Hart, people look back on his body of work. I think they both have an influence on, you know, pro wrestling across the board, not just, you know, specific to WWE's approach or to AEW's approach match-wise.
Right. Now, obviously, you talk about the two greatest eras in wrestling, and people usually point out one of two, the Attitude Era or the Golden Era. Yep. And then there's this gap in between from, like, I would say 92-ish to 96. And these two were literally the only ones that were, at least for in WWE's case, really the only guys to watch, because you had the time of the stupid gimmicks like Duke the Dumpster Drosy and Mantar and the Goon. And these are
Doink and Dink and
right. So these were the guys that kind of carried WWE through the worst of times. Fast forward now to 2022, and you have the same debate kind of happening right now where it's like, is wrestling the worst it's ever been? And you look at these two guys and, like, is wrestling getting taken too seriously with, like, guys like Bret, or is everybody doing stuff like Shawn Michaels? But yet there's no one at the top that's, like, taking it to the mainstream audience, because Shawn and Bret weren't really doing that per se in the mid 90s. Then it came across the Attitude Era. So maybe we're heading into that boom like we had in the Attitude Era. And this is kind of that gap in between. But you look at especially the black and gold brand of NXT with Triple H running the show and Shawn Michaels having his hand on it. A lot of those wrestlers, you could see the influence of Shawn Michaels. AEW today, you could see, especially in the tag team division, a lot of the influence of Shawn Michaels from all the super kicks and all the high spots and all stuff like that. You could definitely see, and even a point of, like, overselling, which Shawn was definitely a great seller and sometimes oversold. Let's not forget the match with Hogan at SummerSlam 05. But, you know, you see that. But then you also see the guys that take it serious. And, like, the guys like CM Punk, which actually this is where this whole conversation derived from, his comment in the post-Revolution Scrum where he was saying Bret was always right and hoping that he could have had, you know, the money that people are getting for Saudi Arabia dates and stuff like that. And I definitely see the influence in Bret Hart, and you could see who's a Bret Hart guy, who's a Shawn Michaels guy. And today, I think people are debating which promotion's better when it's really just what philosophy works in today's wrestling.
I think that, well, first of all, I listened to that whole segment, and I don't necessarily agree that, Shawn didn't, look, Shawn is criticized for having parts of his career where he was more or less a dick.
Yep. Right.
I don't think he never he had a different approach than, obviously Bret takes things a little more serious, it would seem, but with Shawn, I never got the sense that his matches were heavily reliant on like big spots, like continuously. Did they have spots, and was Shawn working what was then maybe more of like a high flyer approach? Yeah, but if you look at Shawn's matches now, like that's not really high flying. Like what? An elbow drop, a moonsault, a dive to the outside. Like that's pretty common. And the other thing with the Shawn Michaels matches, it was spread out. Mm-hmm. It was paced. It wasn't like we're going to do this big spot for the sake of doing big spots back to back to back to back.
Right.
So I think that while Shawn influenced a certain majority of pro wrestling fans because he was so over the top and he was doing things that were different and stood out, and for his personality and all that type of stuff, I don't think that it was like his in-ring influence was meant to be like, okay, we're just going to do continuous spot after spot after spot after spot. Shawn still had a very technical approach to his matches, and they were planned out very well from a storytelling point of view.
Right, and I think that's really what's missing in today's wrestling. Like, yes, you could have all these cool spots and table spots and weapons and high-flying spots, like, oh my God, moments, jumping from the cage or whatever, but what separates Shawn Michaels from all these people that he's influenced is that Shawn did it, as you pointed out, from a storytelling perspective. There was a reason to do it other than, oh shit, this is going to look cool and the fans are going to pop for it. He told you why you're going to pop for it. He figured out why it needed to be done. Just for an example, go watch the Hell in a Cell match with The Undertaker.
Yeah.
If it's not for him selling the impact of this match, are we having Hell in a Cell matches in 2022? 25 years later, almost, 25 years later, 35 years later, whatever the number is, that's the stuff that you kind of saw it once he started getting involved with NXT, and probably what he's doing now, being a huge part of NXT 2.0, that I think some of these independent wrestlers are like, oh, he was just a guy that did a bunch of super kicks and moonsaults and high spots. And you see like the Young Bucks, obviously you see the influence there because they dress like the Rockers or Adam Cole and doing all the super kicks. Like you could tell were influenced by Shawn Michaels. And obviously the stuff with the Elite and being the Elite is a lot of stuff that DX did in the Attitude Era, or at least that like tongue-in-cheek joke shit and try to, bring the inside out. That's what the Young Bucks are doing, and that's what influences them. Is it necessarily a bad thing? No, but it's just a philosophy thing. And personally, I'm one that, yes, there needs to be seriousness and everything needs to happen for a reason, but I don't mind the comedy stuff. And that's what Shawn was. Like, when he needed to be serious, he was, but he was funny as hell. Just look at his stuff during the Ruthless Aggression era. There's some funny stuff in there. Look at all the time he kicked Stan, aka Shawn Spears. But it's like stuff like that's just hilarious. But he was serious when he needed to be.
Yeah, and I think so. You brought up the Elite, and obviously, they're a faction. If nothing else, when you look at the influence that both of them have had, whether it's Bret Hart as with the Hart Foundation, Shawn Michaels and DX, there's been some obvious influence as far as factions, and especially with the Elite. The Wolfpack hand gesture and all that type of stuff. The Too Sweet. That type of stuff, that all kind of comes and stems from both the NWO and DX, I think, kind of combined.
Right.
And the fact that there was, Shawn Michaels was in the group that they used to refer to themselves as the Clique and all those types of things. So obviously there's going to be negative things that are said, probably more so about the way that the Clique influenced things backstage. But if nothing else, these two guys, when you look at where the time in which they were at the top of the card, they were transitioning away from like the super heavyweight champion guys, like your Hogans, your Ultimate Warriors, guys like that were, massive. And even during that time when they were on top, you had champions like Diesel and you had guys like Sid who were still like 6'5", 6'7", 6'8", however big, almost 300 pounds. That wasn't Shawn Michaels and that wasn't Bret Hart, but they showed that there is a place for smaller guys in pro wrestling. So when you look at the influence that they've had in pro wrestling, you can certainly see that today. Now, people are obviously going to debate that and say, I can't take it seriously because they're too small or this or that. I think that Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart were right around the size where people could look at them and say, they're still a pro athlete. I think there are some people today that are much smaller, and I can understand why people can't take them seriously, or if they want to at least try to make the argument, I at least understand it. But for them, they very much put on the map that, yeah, you can go and challenge for a world championship and be taken seriously, or be the champion and put the company on your back. Now, did it translate to ticket sales and all that type of stuff? You can argue no, but I don't know if that necessarily had to do with their size so much as you pointed out, the fact that the characters at that time, nobody was really into it.
Right. And even then, like that bridge from 93 to 96, like WCW was getting all of the older guys in WWE, and it worked for a little bit, but Hogan got stale and there wasn't really doing much with Savage and Flair and stuff like that. And it took the NWO in 96 to really kick them into another gear. And then we got Austin, and, the Monday Night War really kicked into effect between 96 and 2001. But it was really this gap here that influenced today's wrestling. Now, you could say ticket sales aren't as good for both companies. You could say ratings aren't as good for both companies. And maybe this proves that the smaller guys are not selling, and you need the larger than life characters like a Roman or a Brock Lesnar. But at the same time, you need these guys to bridge that gap for when that next megastar happens, that next Austin, that next Rock, that next Taker kind of thing. And I think regardless of who's on the top of the card, as far as what goes between the ropes, I think Bret and Shawn are the perfect examples. Whether you think it should be super serious, or you could be serious when you need to be, but comedic at the same time, that's where wrestling needs to be. You could be a Bret guy and be totally fine and still make the top of the card. You could be a Shawn guy and still make the top of the card. But I think today, where people are arguing WWE versus AEW, that's not really the debate you should be having, because they both have their flaws. And when you really think about the core of what you're debating, it's really, are you a Bret guy or are you a Shawn guy? And I know there's going to be people out there that say, well, I'm both. I'm one. I like Bret, but I'm more of a Shawn guy. You like both, but you're more of a Bret guy. It's safe to say.
How would you have guessed from watching this show?
Seriously. But I think that's really the debate you have to have. Is wrestling supposed to be fully Bret Hart, or is it fully Shawn Michaels, or is it a blend of the two? And I think that would be a great comment. Let us know in the comments what you guys think. So close out with this. Both of them today, if they were in their prime, would they be main eventers, and would they be megastars today?
Megastars, I mean, I don't know. That's just megastars tough just because there's only been a handful of them throughout pro wrestling history. They'd be stars and they'd be considered the best at what they're doing, because, history has even proven that they're at that level. They can perform their stuff, whether you're looking at Shawn's matches, whether you're looking at Bret matches. I go back and watch their matches frequently. And it's not like it looks aged or dated or anything like that. They can go out there and wrestle, take Bret in his prime, take Shawn in their prime. I'll go put them in the main event of WrestleMania this year against Roman, or at Double or Nothing against Kenny Omega, no problem. Like, that's how good they were. It's not like it's dated. Right. And that's the other thing too. Like, we're right around WrestleMania season right now. People think of WrestleMania. When I think of WrestleMania, there's a handful of names that come to mind. Obviously, The Undertaker, Hogan, guys like that. But Shawn and Bret are two names that continuously will always stand out for me. Because when you look at it, if you want a more technical match, Bret is your guy. He was as technical as it gets, one of the best technicians, maybe the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be of all time. You can probably make that argument. But then when you look at it from a storytelling standpoint, Shawn was great at that, selling-wise, all that type of stuff. So when you're looking back at WrestleMania, the standard that they set, putting WrestleMania matches on the map, the ladder match, the fact that Shawn had that type of influence with Razor to influence ladder matches for years and years and years to come.
Yep.
I go back and watch matches with Bret and Piper, HBK and Taker. I mean, there's so many special moments and matches that they had. Steve Austin and Bret Hart. They're so synonymous with what most would consider the biggest wrestling show of all time to this point, that they help set the standard, if nothing else, for what a good match really is supposed to be. So their influence then stands true today. They can go in main event any pay-per-view, I think, and still be the top dog in any company and any promotion.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. And one thing you have to take into consideration with these two guys is you talk about them in WrestleMania. You ever talk about whether or not they won or lost their matches? And that is such a huge problem in today's wrestling, where people are so focused on who won and who lost that they forget the most important aspect of that match. It's how you won or lost. Bret Hart has lost a few times at WrestleMania. Shawn Michaels, I think, has the second most losses behind Triple H at WrestleMania, and he's Mr. Freaking WrestleMania.
Yep.
So it goes to show you, like, it's not necessarily if you win or lose. It's how you win or lose in professional wrestling. And these guys, honestly, if I were to take two guys to coach today's wrestlers, Shawn and Bret, instantly, my two head coaches, and they would, I think, shape wrestling for 20 years ahead. But let us know in the comments below what you think. Is this really an AEW versus WWE war? Or is it really just a debate of philosophies between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart? Don't forget to search us over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at STPB Podcast. Subscribe. We'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psycho Babble.